Folks, hello and welcome to Tavern Chat. I'm your host, Erik Tenkar, your bartender in the OSR, and we're about to go down a rabbit hole. Alphastream, not a site that I ever have heard of before, but they did a lot of work. They have looked at the changes in the core books that have been reflected online for D&D 5e and did a great job putting this stuff together. So, the article here is what we can learn from WotC's core book sensitivity and inclusivity changes. And listen, I know there's this whole issue of go woke, go broke. I'm not looking at that aspect, okay? I'm looking at how things actually change in meaning. You can change verbiage, you can change the words without directly changing the meaning. And there are ways you can say things probably that are better stated and still have the same general meaning. But what we see here is a lot of the stuff, the meaning changes. Now, is that intentional? In certain circumstances, I think so. I think other times it's just lazy, but let's look at it. So, language changes. I mean, again, there was a lot of work put into this article. I will include a link to this. You should probably give it a good look. This may wind up being two episodes. It might have to be a two-parter. So, WotC changes in the 2014 core books. So these changes were starting at least early in the year, and the changes you see in the core books online are changes that you're certainly going to see when 5.5 D&D 1 6.0, not a new edition. That's a new edition. Whatever. Um, you're going to see those changes reflected in there. So, he talks about how some of these changes he found, or his team found, was errata changes, which you think that if you're making errata, you'd point out that, hey, we changed this. There's a change. Change logs are a thing. Why would you not do a change log? Because the idea is we never make mistakes. Therefore, these corrections always were. It's kind of like 1984. So, and the author shares in April at the Creator Summit, I told WotC staff that I had noticed these changes and that I wanted to share them, though I thought I would rather WotC do so. They have said they plan to, but it's been more than 7 months. So here's my guide to the changes. Okay. And it says in place for months. So again, they're not new changes, but they haven't been noticed. Why haven't they been noticed? Because people don't necessarily reread stuff that they've already read, and when you do, your brain's already going to, I already know this material, I'm just looking for this specific part. So, savagery and civilization, this is an issue. All right, so let's see what the changes are, and he does a pretty good job. uh, if it's in red, it's the original. If it's in green, it's been changed. Savage giants has been changed to brutal giants. There's a change in meaning there. However, you're in the ballpark. That's fine. Savage raiders to merciless raiders. I think it loses some of the impact, but again, we'll go with that. Can expect to fight savage orcs. Can expect to fight ruthless bandits. See, now we've got three different words that they're using for savage: brutal, merciless, ruthless. And one that's replacing orcs, because, right, orcs are not necessarily evil anymore. So now they're just bandits. But that changes the imagery, right? That changes what is to be expected. But we'll move on from there. This is in the DMG. So, above a barbarian horde, above an invading horde, changes the concept of what's coming in, right? An invading horde unless you're saying horde is describing um, a barbarian society, not necessarily, right? A horde is it's a large group of soldiers essentially. So an invading horde, you've changed that meaning from a barbarian horde. But barbarian is still an okay word to use as a class. They just can't be savages. All right. In the monster manual changes, often the simplest approach is to remove the problematic language. Dwarves and other civilized folks who might be friends becomes dwarves and other folks who might be friends. I Does it change it the meaning a little bit? I'm okay with that one. Almost as numerous, but far more savage and brutal, and almost uniformly evil are the races of goblinoids. Now, notice there's a qualifier there. Almost. It means there are exceptions to the rules, just like Drist was the exception to the rule that drow are evil. And that has now become almost as numerous are the races of goblinoids, no longer savage and no longer brutal. And then it explains goblinoids, hobgoblins, and bugbears, orcs, gnolls, lizard folks. Took out the also uniformly evil. Interesting. Again, changes the whole imagery, and that can be good and that can be bad. But if you're trying to set up the opposition to the PCs, savage and brutal and almost uniformly evil, that's what you want your player characters to be defending the let's say civilized folks, but you can't say civilized. The urban dwelling. You see, you can't say civilized. Raids against civilized lands, and that became their raids. They hunt the wild game, but they took out against civilized lands. They settled near the rural edges of civilized lands. They settled near the rural edges of settled lands. Again, it does change the meaning. You could parse it. I don't necessarily agree with taking out the word civilized because that means you're kind of saying that there's no civilizations, there's no history, and every civilization has their own pros and cons and advances. And certain civilizations had technology that others didn't have, and vice versa. But neither here nor there. Savage and territorial becomes violent and territorial. All right. But again, savage usually brings to mind um, what's the word I'm looking for here? Uh, Creatures with or humanoids or whatever with minimal technology. So, violent and territorial brings up a different image, but then they go Quaggoths were never an enlightened species, but they were not always the brutal, underdark denizens they are today. That whole part was taken out. I don't know why, but okay. From the player's handbook, adventurers heading back to civilization to rest and adventurers heading back to their home base to rest is a totally different situation, right? It brings up different imagery to me. Maybe there's difference for you. A fierce warrior of primitive background, a fierce warrior who can enter a battle raid. So that's probably talking about barbarians. So they're taking back that primitive background. And honestly, and I would rather call someone a creature like Quaggas. Don't call them savage, call them primitive and territorial. And that can bring up a similar image. But taking out primitive, it's a descriptor that is correct. Okay, let's move on. Take pride in how their civilized ways sets them apart from animals. Take pride in their settled ways. That makes no sense. Settled ways. As if denying one's connection to nature were a mark of superiority. As if denying one's own nature was a mark of, well, that's just a general language change. But again, civilized, a settled life. That's not, doesn't quite work. But not every member of the tribes deemed barbarian by scions of civilized society has the barbarian class. A true barbarian among these people is as uncommon as a skilled fighter. A barbarian plays an important part as a protector of their people and as a leader in times of war. It totally changed it, but okay. Uh, you don't need to bring the civilized society in, but again, a barbarian class, right, is not going to come out of settled lands. Brought in chains to civilized lands and only now able to win your freedom. Brought in chains to another land and now able to win your freedom. And even the use of civilization, civilized, was in quotations, as in these lands consider themselves civilized, but maybe they aren't. In a fight against civilization's foes becomes in a fight against monstrous foes. Okay, that's fine. Changes the meaning, but it changes the meaning to actually be a bit more focused. I'll accept that. Braving dangers beyond the walls of civilization. Braving dangers in unsettled lands. All right. Could have said wilderness. Braving dangers in the wilderness would have worked well too. This whole settled and unsettled seems like a very poor way of changing the definitions of civilization and wilderness. Okay. Between civilization and the terrors of, it looks like wilderness, between the people you protect and that's, I don't know. They could have been a better way of taking care of that. Consists of thick furs and pelts and is commonly worn by barbarian tribes, evil humanoids, and others who lack access to the tools and materials needed to create better armor. Okay, what's wrong with that? Well, it took that whole last sentence out. So I guess they're describing hide armor, and well, no, can't discuss that. Just leave it in, but take away any kind of definition from it. I think that's part of the issue there. Wow. I'm already about 13, 14 minutes in, and we're nowhere near the end of this. So, from the Monster Manual, savage raiders and pillagers with stooped postures, low forehead, and piggish faces, with prominent lower canines that resemble tusks. These are orcs. Orcs are burly raiders. Why burly? He could have said primitive. I think that would have been more accurate. Again, savage has a connotation to it, and I understand that. Primitive, uh, uncivilized raiders. Again, civilization. Unsettled doesn't sound right. I'll put you that way. They took out the whole description, except for prominent lower canines that resemble tusks. So, now this is here. I'll end it with this one because this one gets a little. They're talking about half orc races. So, strength and power are the greatest of orcish virtues. And orcs embrace all manner of mighty creatures in their tribes. Rejecting notions of racial purity, they proudly welcome ogres, orcs, crossbreeds. Luthic, the orc goddess of fertility and wife of Grumsh, demands that orcs procreate often and indiscriminately so that orc hordes swell generation after generation. And that's descriptive. Now, that becomes strength and power are the greatest of orcish virtues. And orcs embrace all manner of mighty creatures in their tribes. They, again, rejecting notions of racial purity, they now becomes just they. I'll accept that. I don't think we needed that. And racial purity brings back memories of, I don't know, the 1930s and 40s. Proudly welcomes ogres, trolls, orcs, and orgos into their yada yada yada. Orc crossbreeds now become progeny with non-orcs. I'm okay with that. Crossbreeds is actually a fairly offensive term if one thinks about it. Progeny with non-orcs, that's fine. The offspring of an orc and the non-orc humanoid of similar stature is either an orc or a half-orc. And that's fine, but they leave out the whole goddess of fertility. Luthic, the goddess of fertility and wife of Grumsh, demands that orcs procreate often and indiscriminately. Now, they're not saying violently, right? They're saying indiscriminately. That could be interpreted as promiscuously. I don't see an issue with that necessarily, but that's been taken out. So let's see what else got taken out. The orcs' drive to reproduce runs stronger than any other humanoid race, and they readily crossbreed with other races. When an orc procreates with, and this has been apparently removed because there's no change down below. They just have, yeah, I don't know. So that was apparently it's going to be interesting because later on they're going to talk about sexuality of the characters, but they're not willing to talk about sexuality here. So, and it's going to be interesting because I believe we had hordes up above, but neither here nor there. All right, folks, I'm going to stop this video now. I'll be back tomorrow. We'll pick it up here. It's interesting. You need to know because here's the deal. WotC, for good or ill, sets the tone for many publishers. And they like it that way. And the fact that they're making these changes without a changelog is disturbing. I find that more disturbing than any of these changes themselves. The fact that they are making changes and there's no changelog that they're publishing tells me that they want to do this stealthily, that they don't want to make this publicly. And I think this article is a great article. And the author is more for these changes than I probably am. But he does a great, or she does a great job detailing these changes. Again, go to the original article. I will link it so you can check it out. Other than that, as always, be safe, be well, God bless. Roll those dice, roll them well. There'll be a live stream on Wednesday. I don't know if we have any special guests. Maybe, maybe not. You get me and Mike. What more do you need? All right, folks. On that note, I'll catch you later.